The Lord be with you.
And also with you.
Let us pray. O God, your never-failing providence sets in order all things both in heaven and earth. Put away from us, we entreat you, all hurtful things, and give us those things which are profitable for us. Through Jesus Christ our Lord, who lives and reigns with you and the Holy Spirit, one God, forever and ever. Amen.
Amen.
A reading from the first book of Samuel. Now the boy Samuel was serving the Lord under Eli. The Lord's words was rare at that time, and visions weren't widely known. One day, Eli, whose eyes had grown so weak he was unable to see, was lying down in his room. God's lamp hadn't gone out yet, and Samuel was lying down in the Lord's temple where God's chest was. The Lord called to Samuel. "I'm here," he said. Samuel hurried to Eli and said, "I'm here. You called me?" "I didn't call you," Eli replied. "Go lie down." So he did. Again the Lord called Samuel. So Samuel got up, went to Eli and said, "I'm here. You called me?" "I didn't call, my son," Eli replied. "Go and lie down." Now Samuel didn't yet know the Lord, and the Lord's word hadn't yet been revealed to him. A third time the Lord called Samuel. He got up, went to Eli, and said, "I'm here. You called me." Then Eli realized that it was the Lord who was calling the boy. So Eli said to Samuel, "Go and lie down. If he calls you, say, 'Speak, Lord, your servant is listening.'" So Samuel went and lay down where he had been. Then the Lord came and stood there, calling just as before, "Samuel, Samuel." Samuel said, "Speak, your servant is listening." The Lord said to Samuel, "I am about to do something in Israel that will make the ears of all who hear it tingle. On that day, I will bring to pass against Eli everything I said about his household, every last bit of it. I told him that I would punish his family forever because of the wrongdoing he knew about, how his sons were cursing God, but he wouldn't stop them. Because of that, I swore about Eli's household that his family's wrongdoing will never be reconciled by sacrifice or by offering." Samuel lay there until morning, then opened the doors of the Lord's house. Samuel was afraid to tell the vision to Eli. But Eli called Samuel, saying, "Samuel, my son." "I'm here," Samuel said. "What did he say to you?" Eli asked. "Don't hide anything from me. May God deal harshly with you, and worse still, if you hide from me a single word from everything he said to you." So Samuel told him everything and hid nothing from him. "He is the Lord," Eli said. "He will do as he pleases." So Samuel grew up, and the Lord was with him, not allowing any of his words to fail. All Israel, from Dan to Beersheba, knew that Samuel was trustworthy as the Lord's prophet. Hear what the Spirit is saying to God's people.
Thanks be to God.
Lord, you have searched me out and known me. You know my sitting down and my rising up. You discern my thoughts from afar. You trace my journeys and my resting places, and are acquainted with all my ways. Indeed, there is not a word on my lips, but you, O Lord, know it altogether. You press upon me behind and before, and lay your hand upon me. Such knowledge is too wonderful for me. It is so high that I cannot attain to it. For you created my inmost parts. You knit me together in my mother's womb. I will thank you because I am marvelously made. Your works are wonderful, and I know it well. My body was not hidden from you while I was being made in secret and woven in the depths of the earth. Your eyes beheld my limbs, yet unfinished in the womb. All of them were written in your book. They were fashioned day by day, when as yet there was none of them. How deep I find your thoughts, O God! How great is the sum of them! If I were to count them, they would be more in number than the sand. To count them all, my lifespan would need to be like yours.
A reading from Paul's second letter to the Corinthians. We don't preach about ourselves. Instead, we preach about Jesus Christ as Lord, and we describe ourselves as your slaves for Jesus' sake. God said that light should shine out of the darkness. He is the same one who shone in our hearts to give us the light of the knowledge of God's glory in the face of Jesus Christ. But we have this treasure in clay pots so that the awesome power belongs to God and doesn't come from us. We are experiencing all kinds of trouble, but we aren't crushed. We are confused, but we aren't depressed. We are harassed, but we aren't abandoned. We are knocked down, but we aren't knocked out. We always carry Jesus' death around in our bodies so that Jesus' life can also be seen in our bodies. We who are alive, always being handed over to death, are always being handed over to death for Jesus' sake, so that Jesus' life can also be seen in our bodies that are dying. So death is at work in us, but life is at work in you. Hear what the Spirit is saying to God's people.
Thanks be to God.
The Holy Gospel of our Savior Jesus Christ according to Mark.
Glory to you, Lord Christ.
Jesus went through the wheat fields on the Sabbath. As the disciples made their way, they were picking the heads of wheat. The Pharisees said to Jesus, "Look, why are they breaking the Sabbath law?" He said to them, "Haven't you ever read what David did when he was in need, when he and those with him were hungry? During the time when Abiathar was priest, David went into God's house and ate the bread of the presence, which only the priests were allowed to eat. He also gave bread to those who were with him." Then he said, "The Sabbath was created for humans. Humans weren't created for the Sabbath. This is why the human one is Lord even over the Sabbath." Jesus returned to the synagogue. A man with a withered hand was there. Wanting to bring charges against Jesus, they were watching Jesus closely. He would heal on the Sabbath. He said to the man with the withered hand, "Step up where people can see you." Then he said to them, "Is it legal on the Sabbath to do good or to do evil, to save life or to kill?" But they said nothing. Looking around at them with anger, deeply grieved at their unyielding hearts, he said to the man, "Stretch out your hand." So he did, and his hand was made healthy. At that, the Pharisees got together with the supporters of Herod to plan how to destroy Jesus. The Gospel of Christ.
Praise to you, Lord Christ. Good morning. I've been here before, but just to remind you, and I think it's printed there in your bulletin, my name is Robb Leacock. I'm chaplain at the Episcopal Collegiate School, and because I don't have a regular Sunday gig, I'm always pleased when my number gets called to fill in here at another parish. Thank you for welcoming me this morning. You don't hear too much about blasphemy these days. I want to be clear at the start, I'm not endorsing blasphemy. I'm pretty sure it's still frowned upon. We also know that history has shown that charges of blasphemy have also yielded some unfortunate and tragic results. So again, I want to caution us not to leave worship ready to make accusations of blasphemy. This isn't that kind of sermon. But buckle up, friends. I may have rolled the dice a little bit on preaching this morning. At a bare minimum, most of us understand blasphemy as something bad, that something we shouldn't do. But what does it really mean? That's perhaps a more complicated question. We understand the gravity of something like blasphemy, but do we have a clear definition? Well, as I often do, I look to my Greek and Latin meanings, and I looked up the word blasphemy, and it comes from two Greek words. The first is blopto, which means to damage. And then this word pheme, which is more nuanced. It can mean fame. It's where we get the word fame, or reputation, or rumor. Or it can be like a report about someone or something. But it can also mean something a little more divine or prophetic, something like a solemn testimony. We might understand blasphemy in a myriad of ways. It's been defined lots of different ways, as maligning or defaming or cursing God or even the church, or even as a sin against the virtues of religion or of faith. Blasphemy as a concept has had quite the history as outlined in Scripture. And a fair warning, passages about blasphemy are not necessarily the most comfortable passages for us in the Bible. In Leviticus, for instance, sometimes a risky book to reference. In Leviticus, we read that anyone who blasphemes the name of the Lord shall be put to death. That's pretty dire. Thankfully, over the course of history, the church and human society have decided to revise and reinterpret applications of the laws around blasphemy, as well as perhaps narrowing and softening the interpretation of what blasphemy is. We can appreciate that blasphemy laws have been abused and misused for millennia, even into the modern era, much to the shame of the church. My mentioning this particular passage, though, is to perhaps glean a deeper understanding of the notion of what blasphemy is, right? That it means to misuse the name of God, or to misuse the commandments of God, to invoke God's name improperly, to misapply God's word, right? To take something that is intended to be godly and to use it for a more illicit purpose. Oh, okay. Before I wander into the wilderness with a sermon, see if I can't steer it right back onto the right path. Our Old Testament lesson is a very well-known passage from the first book of Samuel. Both books of Samuel comprise a very long saga about a significant turning point in the history of the ancient Israelites, and much of the story relies upon the important prophetic witness of Samuel. And this morning's lesson is perhaps the most well-known story of Samuel, the call of Samuel. Many of us who know this story are fond of the call of Samuel, right? He's a young man. He's doing his best to live and do right and follow God in a world that's become dark and challenging. And one night, Samuel is laying down, he's trying to go to bed, and he hears a voice calling him by name. And then there's this sort of funny back and forth between Samuel and his boss, Eli. You know, we kind of see Samuel, well, he's young, maybe he's a little naive, a little inexperienced, and he doesn't realize what's really going on, that it is God who's calling him. And Eli, in his wisdom, realizes what's happening. And he says to Samuel, okay, next time you hear anything, just say, speak, for your servant is listening. I'd like to point out that people in my line of work, we love the call of Samuel as it relates to our own calling and discernment. We love to, we love to see ourselves as Samuel, But I want to be careful because we shouldn't neglect the broader context of this call narrative. You see, immediately prior to this passage, what we have is a lengthy oracle from God, and it's pronouncing judgment against Eli's sons, who are the next generation of temple priests, the ones who are inheriting the mantle of religious leadership. And this oracle is anything but a happy message for Eli or his sons. Eli's sons were not following the path they were supposed to follow. You see, they were misusing their power and privilege as priests for their own benefit. They were functioning as priests, but really they were using their role for their own benefit rather than truly following their call in service to God and their community. What they were doing was they were using the temple sacrifices as their own personal feast. They were eating the temple sacrifices. And this, by definition, and it says in this oracle, this was blasphemy. They were taking something godly and they were using it for the wrong purpose. And in this oracle, God warns Eli, and Eli chooses to do nothing. And so as a result, God takes the next step of calling a young temple assistant to speak God's prophetic word. So the call of Samuel is not quite the endearing tale that people like me often want to make it out to be, not entirely. Samuel no sooner says, "Speak, for your servant is listening," and that's usually where preachers like to cut off the story. Then God declares the consequences for the sons of Eli's blasphemy, the consequences for their cursing God. Notably, it's not a message that Samuel is really too eager to deliver. The sons of Eli were pretending that their words and actions were of God when really it was motivated out of greed. Two priests using their priestly power and status for personal gain. Sadly, there is nothing new under the sun. I did try to think of how I could work in justifying a private jet for myself in this sermon, but to no avail. Blasphemy. A curious thing. It's the slippery slope of taking what God has called us to do and twisting it to suit ourselves. And lest anyone think that I've come to wag my finger, I'll be sure to point it at myself. As I said earlier, people in my line of work, we love the call of Samuel. Right? We love to see ourselves as little versions of Samuel. Who wouldn't, right? I'd love to tell you, how long ago I was but a young man and I heard in the night a voice calling me by name. But of course, let me skip over the part about the priests misusing their status as priests for personal gain. Notably, when I was pretending earlier this week to be a Greek scholar, I realized that the word blasphemy and the word prophecy share a root word, this root pheme. Blasphemy and prophecy share a root word. It's evidence, perhaps, that there's maybe a fine line between the two, between blasphemy and prophecy, that we might actually easily confuse the two. That maybe there's a narrow path or a narrow, thin line between proclaiming and following God's will and taking our own will and pretending that it's God's will. In my ministry, I am often reminded of a solemn warning that a seminary professor of mine offered to me and my classmates when he said, "You must always take care not to confuse taking yourself seriously with taking God seriously." And as simple as that sounds, I can tell you that the ease with which such confusion or even self-deception can happen is pretty stunning. Confusing taking myself seriously with taking God seriously. Well, if we're talking about blasphemy, the situation with Eli's sons is a pretty straightforward case study. But if we look at the gospel lesson, it's more complex and more nuanced. We have these two little stories that are sort of jammed together of Jesus being basically accused of blasphemy, of violating Sabbath laws. When the disciples were a bit hungry, probably because following Jesus around was hard work, you might build up a hunger, And as they're passing by a field, they pick some of the grain. Now, is the issue that they were stealing something that didn't belong to them? No, not at all. The issue is that they were doing this on the Sabbath. And picking grain constituted work. And you were not, according to the law, allowed to work on the Sabbath. They were violating the Sabbath law. And some Pharisees are quick to point out this violation, to make an accusation against Jesus and his disciples. And then there's quickly this other story where Jesus returns to the synagogue, and there he is met by a man with a withered hand, an injury or deformity of some sort. And it says that these Pharisees were watching Jesus closely because they were looking for him to maybe break the law. What's interesting is Jesus isn't bothered by this. He perceives this immediately. In fact, he tells the man, "Why don't you come up front where everyone can see you?" And he sort of makes a show of violating the law by healing this man on the Sabbath. What's problematic here is not so much the law or the legal interpretation itself. The law is not bad. The Pharisaic understanding of the law here isn't really that extraordinary. I mean, honoring the Sabbath was something that faithful ancient Judeans were not casual about. They were serious about it. It was serious business to them. And if they were just looking for a discussion with Jesus about what it means to faithfully observe the Sabbath, okay, that's fine. But something else is going on here. At this point, Jesus is no stranger to accusations of blasphemy. Even before this episode, he's already been charged with blasphemy. And throughout the Gospels, people are looking for how to charge him, particularly with blasphemy, with misusing God's word. In the Gospel passage, Jesus immediately perceives that the issue isn't about whether or not it's legal according to the law to do good and life-giving things on the Sabbath. It isn't about the Sabbath or picking grain or healing. I mean, in Samuel, Eli's sons were using the temple sacrifices as their own personal snack bar. But here, there's this confusion over what it means to take God seriously and to take oneself seriously. And what we have is the religious establishment, those in power and status represented by this group of Pharisees, maybe not all Pharisees, but this group, who are saying hungry people can't pick grain on the Sabbath because it threatens their status and power. And who does that serve? Well, not hungry people. They say to Jesus, you can't work on the Sabbath, and healing constitutes work, so you can't heal on the Sabbath. And who does that serve? It doesn't serve people in need of healing, does it? If we wanted, we could really delve into how keeping hungry and poor people and people with disabilities and others on the fringes helps maintain systems of power and privilege for a few. Jesus could have gotten into that, but instead he says the Sabbath was created for humans. Humans weren't created for the Sabbath. This is his way of pointing out to them that the law wasn't given to you and to me just to maintain our privilege. As I was reflecting on this lesson, I had to pause and think about, did the sons of Eli, did they set out to commit blasphemy? Was that their aim? Was that their goal? Did they set out and think, how can we work this to our own angle? And I don't think so. Or these Pharisees, were they having regular meetings about how they could use the religious teaching to maintain their privilege and authority over others, and then behave hypocritically toward Jesus and his disciples? Maybe not. I think that because, I think it's a little too easy for me to say, I would never be like the sons of Eli. I would never do anything like that. It's a little too easy for good Christians to say, we would never act like the Pharisees. How do we know the difference then between blasphemy and prophecy? How do we discern the difference between if we are speaking and acting according to God's will and desire or according to our own wants and ambitions? How do I know the difference between taking God seriously and taking myself seriously? Well, just as I'm wondering how I might rescue this sermon, I'm also wondering, how will I be rescued from the folly of my own power and privilege? Well, the truth is, I don't think there's any easy answer. There's no trick to it. It takes a lot to know the difference. It takes humility, something which humans are not always naturally inclined toward all the time. It takes no small amount of grace, the grace of a loving and merciful God. Like Samuel, we have to listen. We have to listen more carefully than we sometimes want to. Listening requires us to do things like speak less. Challenge for people in my line of work. A challenge in our world where everybody seems to be talking. Like Samuel, we have to pause and reflect. We maybe have to ask ourselves a few questions and exercise some patience. Like Samuel, we have to do some real honest-to-goodness discernment. We have to ponder and even wrestle with things. And like Samuel, we have to be ready to speak and do even unpopular things, things that might upset the system. We have to be ready to take the hard path rather than, like Eli's sons, the easy path. In our epistle this morning, because I had to hit all three lessons, I think. Paul's writing to the Corinthians. It's a sermon for another time, but this is a group of people who are struggling with all sorts of issues relating to their own privilege. But here Paul offers them just a beautiful and straightforward way of looking at things. He says, we don't preach about ourselves. Instead, we preach about Jesus Christ as Lord, and we describe ourselves as your slaves for Jesus' sake. In another translation of this very same passage, it says, it is not ourselves that we proclaim Christ Jesus as Lord, and ourselves as your servants. And for me, this verse has often been a helpful check on my own privilege, a helpful check, a helpful test over whether or not I'm taking God seriously or myself seriously. Who am I proclaiming? I ask myself. Is it God or is it me? Is it God's word that I'm declaring, or is it another different word? Whose gospel am I preaching? Is it my own, or is it Jesus's? Is it Christ's lordship that I am declaring and uplifting and upholding, or is it somebody else's lordship? Who and what am I serving? Is it myself? Or is it the person of Christ reflected in each individual that I encounter? I feel like I've come up with more questions than answers this morning. But we do live in a world that's so full of noise and shouting, a world so full of finger-pointing and accusations and condemnation. It's a world where there's so much flexing and fighting over who has the status and the power over others. A world that is gripped by fear over the issue of privilege. So much that even the ideas and institutions that we hold sacred are misused. Makes me feel like the sons of Eli and some of these Pharisees would feel right at home. And what are we to do? Except to do our best to listen for God's call, to discern what God is asking of us, and by God's grace to declare in word and action the radical and transforming love of Jesus. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit.